Hello, my dear emperors. I'm Marco, and tonight we're drifting into the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, I guess. Why I guess? Because this isn't your usual history lecture. Here, we don't just talk about France and wars. We speak as if you were Napoleon. This is a second-person journey, immersive, a little sarcastic, and meant to carry you gently into sleep while your mind wanders through time. From the Corsican cradle to the windswept rock of St. Helena, from revolutionary dreams to imperial obsessions, this story doesn't just retell history. It begins on an island that never quite felt like home. So before we begin, if you enjoy this kind of content, consider subscribing so you don't miss a thing. Now if you're up for it, dim the lights and join me. You're born in Ajaccio, Corsica, on August 15th, 7th, a perfect summer day for a child who was already too late for his homeland. Because you see, the French had only just snatched Corsica from the Genoese. By the time your mother cradled you, the island was learning to say we instead of si. Technically, you're French. But try telling that to your neighbours, who still mutter in Italian dialects and grumble about colonialism at breakfast. You're born into contradiction, not quite French enough for Paris, not quite Corsican enough for home. A child of transitions. The perfect seed for someone who would later redefine borders with a flick of his glove. Your father, Carlo Buonaparte, yes, still Italian spelling back then, is a minor noble, and you learn early on that nobility without money is like a sword without a blade, pretty to look at, mostly useless in a fight. He knows how to sign his name with flair and lose money at cards. But bless him, he dreams big. Big enough to schmooze with French officials once it becomes clear the Corsican resistance is going nowhere. One day a patriot, the next a bureaucrat. Your mother, Letizia, now there's a force of nature. Iron-spined, God-fearing, a woman who could probably command a battalion if given the chance. She gives birth to 13 children. 8 survive. You're number 2. No pressure. They say Corsican mothers raise their sons like Roman generals or bandits. Either way, childhood for you is less about wooden toys and more about learning that power is never given, only taken. You grow up climbing hills, dodging older siblings, and absorbing every drop of pride, shame, and politics the island offers. You hear the stories of Pasquale Paoli, the freedom fighter who tried to make Corsica an independent republic. Your dad once backed him until he didn't. The flip-flop sticks in your memory like a stone in your boot. At 5, you already know how to scowl. At 7, you understand that being poor nobility is worse than being just poor. It means everyone expects you to act rich without the wallet to match. And while your classmates daydream of farm life or priesthood, you're watching the sea, wondering what's beyond it. Because deep down, you don't just want a better life, you want more. You want the kind of life that bends maps, topples kings, and rewrites textbooks. Your household is full of noise, brothers practicing duels with broomsticks, sisters negotiating for attention, your mother running the place like a general with laundry for armor. But there's no mistaking the tension. Money's tight, food is local, simple, bread, olives, a little cheese if you're lucky. You learn to eat quickly and speak rarely at the table. Listen more, a habit that, ironically, you'll drop later when the whole world wants to hear your voice. At 9, your father secures a scholarship for you to study in mainland France. The colony sends its best to the metropole. That's the deal. You're leaving behind your island, your language, your salt-stung hills. And let's be honest, you're also leaving behind comfort, because while Corsica may have been chaotic, it was your chaos. As the ship pulls away, you squint at the coastline fading behind you. Do you feel proud, abandoned, hopeful? Even you don't know. But one thing is clear, your island couldn't contain you. And France, poor France, it has no idea what's about to hit it. France smells different. Less salt, more damp parchment and wet wool. You're 10 years old when you arrive at the military school of Brienne-le-Château. And immediately, you're the weird one. The accent doesn't help. Corsican lilt, thick as goat cheese. Nor does your name, which the other boys trip over like it's a foreign invader. Which, technically, it is. They call you the Little Arab, Not out of geographic accuracy, but because they can't place you and don't care to try. The snow stings. You've never seen this much of it. Corsican winters were chilly but bearable. Here, it seeps into your boots, turns your breath into steam, and makes your fingers clumsy around the quill. You write home often, mostly to Letizia. She sends blessings, advice, and reminders to keep your dignity intact. But she cannot send warmth. At Brienne, class divides are more than just abstract ideas. They eat better food, wear finer clothes, and laugh at jokes that don't involve survival. You are the scholarship boy, tolerated but never embraced. A noble, technically, but only technically. Your boots are mended too often, your coat cut too short. You become intimately familiar with the sensation of not belonging. So you withdraw into books, into silence, into maps. You obsess over Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Charlemagne, men who rewrote their destinies, men whose names shaped empires. You're not reading for entertainment, you're reading for blueprints. Because even now, you don't just want to pass your classes, you want to conquer them. And if you can't beat your classmates in charm or lineage, then you'll defeat them with your mind. You devour geometry, Latin, history, artillery manuals. You sleep with one eye open and the other on your homework. You dream of war. Not the blood, necessarily, though later you'll tolerate that too, but the strategy. The idea that a single clever move can win an empire. And if you can read a battlefield like you read Livy, then you don't need a throne to claim power. Just enough time, just enough force, just enough brilliance. They say you're moody. They say you stare too much. They say your temper flickers like a faulty lantern. But they don't see what's happening inside, the slow ignition of ambition. While they practice courtly dances, you pace alone. While they trade gossip, you imagine formations, terrain advantages, the perfect retreat. There's a small garden behind the dormitories. In spring, when the ground softens, you sit there, sketching forts into the dirt with a stick. You whisper orders to imaginary regiments. You win battles no one sees. History will say you were cold, calculating, manipulative. But in that garden, you're just a boy chasing order in a world that refuses to make room for you. One teacher sees something in you. Abbé Chardon. He says your handwriting is abysmal, but your essays burn with fire. He's the first to suggest you might be destined for more than just artillery school. You think like a general, he says once, casually. You tuck that sentence into your soul and let it simmer for the next 20 years. And then there's the letter, the one your father writes to the French government, begging for a chance, for a placement, for acknowledgement. He dies before the reply comes. Stomach cancer, probably. You get the news in a terse note. No time for mourning, no resources for grief, but something inside you cracks. Not from sorrow, exactly, from the realization that you are now the man of the family, at 12. The school bell rings each morning. With surgical precision, you rise, train, recite, march. But beneath the discipline, you are forging something more than muscle and memory. You are learning patience, the kind that watches quietly as kings falter and governments tremble, the kind that waits for revolutions, like others wait for rain. You graduate early, of course you do. The Royal Military School of Paris is next. Artillery. The most mathematical, least glamorous arm of the service. Perfect. You want precision, not polish. Let the cavalry boys have their plumes and sabres. You want angles, trajectories, firepower. You don't need glory, not yet. Just the right pressure at the right time. And so by 16, you hold a commission. A Corsican peasant noble with muddy boots and imperial dreams. France doesn't know your name yet, but it will, soon. You arrive at the Royal Military School in Paris, still smelling faintly of Brienne's snow and Corsican pine, though you pretend you don't. The city is everything your island wasn't. Grand, chaotic, scented with ambition and sewage in equal measure. Here people speak too quickly and expect you to nod anyway, but you're not here to be Parisian. You're here to finish what Brienne started, your transformation from colonial curiosity to calibrated weapon. Paris is louder than Brienne, and crueler in a different way. No one mocks your accent, not openly. Here, they dismiss you more efficiently, with polite indifference and bored superiority. You're not a curiosity anymore, you're a statistic. Another junior officer in training, and one with too few connections to matter. But you're also faster, hungrier. You complete the 2-year program in one. You absorb artillery manuals like romance novels. Your instructors call you intense, a polite word for relentless. You speak rarely, but when you do, it's with the certainty of someone already sketching battle maps in his sleep. Your commissions come slowly, too slowly. You're 17 and broke. Your father's dead. Your mother writes letters filled with hope and unpaid bills. Your younger siblings depend on you, not that they say so. You feel it in every coin you count twice before spending. You live in cold rented rooms, surviving on bread, dreams, and the occasional political pamphlet. The revolution is beginning to rumble. France is whispering of liberty, fraternity, equality, and guillotines. And you watch. You return briefly to Corsica, still clinging to a romantic idea of belonging. You want to fight for your homeland. You want to matter to your people. But the island has moved on, or worse, it hasn't changed at all. Pasquale Paoli, your childhood idol, the freedom fighter turned exile, turned reluctant hero again. He doesn't trust you. To him, you're a Frenchman now, a collaborator's son, a sellout. You offer him loyalty. He offers you cold shoulders and closed doors. The Corsican mountains that once cradled your childhood now echo with rejection. It stings deeply. And if you weren't already married to ambition, Corsica might have been your mistress, but you leave her, bitter, disillusioned, determined. If you can't be a Corsican hero, then you'll become a French one. Back in mainland France, everything is changing. Louis XVI is wobbling on his throne like overripe fruit. Bread riots, philosophical treatises turned into weapons. A storm is brewing and you feel the wind before anyone else. You write, "Oh yes, remember that pamphlet, the one where you praise the Jacobins, those radical Republicans. You didn't just admire them, you needed them. They're the fast track for someone like you. No noble blood, no money, just tactical genius and very good timing." And so you lean in. The monarchy collapses, the Bastille falls, heads roll, the country goes mad in the name of reason. And you're oddly calm in the chaos. You understand revolutions. They're like artillery, loud, messy, and only useful when aimed correctly. You're stationed in the south, managing troops, watching politics turn deadly in Paris. Robespierre is rising, the reign of terror begins. But you're not terrified, you're strategic, you know how to play the game. Write the right essay, flatter the right ideology, and doors open. Your piece supporting the Jacobins finds its way to the right people. Suddenly, your name doesn't just appear on rosters, it echoes in conversations. And then, Toulon, a port city held by royalists, backed by British, Spanish, and Sardinian forces. A mess. The Republic needs a win, and fast. You're 24, a captain in the artillery, with a plan. You propose taking the high ground, literally. Capture the fort that dominates the harbour, and the city falls like a house of cards. It's risky, bold, obvious, but only after you say it. They let you try, and it works. The cannons roar, the enemy flees, the Republic plants its flag, and you rise. Overnight, Brigadier General Bonaparte, no longer the Corsican outsider. Now you're a name on the lips of Paris, a young man who saved the Republic with math, munitions, and one well-placed hill. The revolution gave you a stage, and you, finally, are ready to perform. They say revolutions eat their children, but you learn to bite back. After Toulon, you're no longer just an artillery officer with an accent. You're a Republican hero, draped in the tricolour, eyed by ministers who are unsure whether to fear you, promote you, or both. You've proven that brilliance can outrun bloodlines, that merit, or the illusion of it, can be louder than money. The revolution. Oh, you fall for it. Not just as an idea, but as a lifeline. Liberty, equality, fraternity. They sound like music after years of snobbery and exile. Here is a system that finally needs someone like you, that doesn't just tolerate ambition, but demands it. You don't just support the revolution, you love it like a partner, volatile and thrilling and doomed. Paris is a madhouse. Robespierre sharpens his speeches like guillotines, and people whisper as much about bread shortages as about the weather. You're walking a razor's edge, because supporting the wrong faction could mean your head. But you're careful. You speak when spoken to. You read the room. You write one Jacobin-friendly piece, and suddenly you're on a list, but the good kind, the kind that gets you noticed. Then Thermidor comes. Robespierre falls. Heads roll again, this time the radical ones. You're associated with the Jacobins, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it looks like you might be next. Your career halts. Your name becomes radioactive. You're too valuable to kill, but too dangerous to promote. So they shelve you, quietly, bureaucratically. But revolutions don't stay stable for long. Paris is restive. Royalists stir. In 1795, just as your star is dimming, a new rebellion erupts in the capital. Monarchists, this time, because everyone wants their turn at chaos. The Directory, the new half-baked government, panics. They need someone competent, someone ruthless, someone not too sentimental about firing on civilians. They remember Toulon. They remember you. You accept, obviously, not because you crave violence, but because this is your redemption arc, your second debut. You deploy cannons across Paris, load them with grape shot, tiny metal balls meant for maximum impact, and when the royalists march, chanting and swelling with conviction, you fire. The sound shatters the city's confidence. The uprising ends in minutes. The streets are slick with disillusionment and smoke. Paris quiets. And overnight, you go from forgotten to famous. A whiff of grape shot, they'll call it later, trying to sound poetic about a massacre. The Directory thanks you with a promotion, because in France, killing for the right cause still gets you a raise. You're 26, a general, and now you're dangerous in a new way. Not just brilliant, but popular, charismatic, an asset with teeth. And then there's Josephine. Ah, Josephine. Rose Tasha de la Pagerie, a widow, a survivor, aristocratic enough to navigate the salons, sensual enough to unmake your world. She's older than you, soft around the edges, but with eyes that promise amusement and secrets in equal measure. You fall hard, perhaps because she's unattainable, perhaps because she's the first woman who doesn't see you as a curiosity or a project. You write letters, so many letters. Some are sweet, others, well, let's just say historians still argue whether they're love notes or strategic maneuvers. She doesn't respond as often as you'd like. That hurts more than a battlefield, but you marry her anyway. March 9th, 1796. 2 days later, you leave to command the army of Italy. Yes, Italy. You kiss your bride, mount your horse, and ride toward your first true test of command. Behind you, a fractured republic. Ahead, mountains, mud, and Austrians. You have 30,000 starving, shoeless soldiers, and the burden of proving you're not just lucky, you're inevitable. You don't whisper promises as you leave. You bark them. You are naked, ill-fed. The richest plains in the world are before you. There you will find honor, glory, and riches. And because you say it with such conviction, they believe you. You believe you. You're not just fighting for France anymore. You're fighting for an idea of yourself that's too big to fit in Paris. And Italy. Italy is your canvas. Time to paint. Italy does not greet you like a hero. It greets you with mildew, rain-soaked uniforms, and an army so disheartened that even their fleas seem listless. Your men are half-starved, half paid and fully skeptical. But you ride in like thunder in a borrowed overcoat, all sharp eyes and sharper promises. You don't look like much, scrawny, sunken cheeks, a bit of a ghost in boots, but your voice carries the weight of a god with a deadline. You give speeches, not orders, not at first. You don't command them to march. You seduce them into believing they must. Soldiers, you say, you are hungry and naked. The Republic owes you much, but can give you nothing. I will lead you into the most fertile plains on earth. Rich provinces, great cities, and honor shall be your reward. That and the plunder. Let's be honest. Then you march. The Alps are a grey, stony joke. Majestic, yes, but not when you're hauling artillery through ice. Hannibal once crossed them with elephants. You cross them with grit and geometry. The Austrians don't expect you so soon. That's their first mistake. The second, underestimating your gift for chaos disguised as strategy. You slice through Piedmont. You crush the Sardinians. You peel territories from the Austrians, like labels from wine bottles. Each victory is rapid, precise, theatrical. You turn supply shortages into opportunities. You capture cities by day and write love letters to Josephine by candlelight. She doesn't answer half the time. You keep writing. The enemy doesn't understand your speed. They still think war is a chess match. You play it like a knife fight in a dark alley. You divide their forces, attack when they rest, hit them where they feel safe. You're not waging war. You're telling a story in blood and terrain, and every chapter ends with you standing on a hill, hands on hips, basking in the smell of panic. And your men, they begin to believe. Their stomachs are still empty, but now their eyes shine. Bonaparte, they say, almost like a spell. You learn their names. You walk among them. You sleep where they sleep. Well, sometimes. The important thing is that they see you do it. Milan falls, then Mantua. Each victory feeds the next. The Austrians scramble, sending reinforcements faster than they can name the disasters. You start calling them by the generals you defeat. Wurmser, Alvinci, like unwanted guests at a dinner party you didn't want to throw. And still you win. But you're not just fighting battles. You're sculpting a version of yourself. You have portraits commissioned, not because you're vain, okay, maybe a little, but because you understand imagery. You ride into Milan like a conqueror and set up court in a palace, of course. There's a throne, and visitors kiss your hand. Modesty was never part of the plan. You establish sister republics. You dictate constitutions. You appoint ministers. You are, in every sense but the formal, becoming a ruler. Back in Paris, they raise eyebrows, but they're too dazzled by your success to interfere. You're sending wagons of treasure northward, art, gold, and letters that read like imperial memoirs. Even the Vatican feels the tremor. The Pope, alarmed, sues for peace. The Treaty of Tolentino gives you everything but the incense. You're now a diplomat, a statesman, a secular prophet in muddy boots. And through it all, you keep writing to Josephine. Why haven't you written? You betray me with your silence. I dream of your kisses. Also, I conquered Verona. Historians still argue whether you loved her or loved the idea of her, the symbol, the silence, the social boost. She certainly had connections, and you certainly had no time for emotional nuance. Still, the letters flow like rivers, while your soldiers march through mountains. By 1797, Italy belongs to you in everything but legal title, and the Austrians, they're done. You negotiate the Treaty of Campo Formio, almost single-handedly. France gains land, influence, bragging rights. You gain something better. Autonomy. Paris can't touch you now. You're too useful, too victorious, too mythologized. You ride back, not as a general, but as a myth in human form. You walk differently. You speak in shorter sentences. You've tasted the edge of empire, and it's addictive. Let the others win skirmishes in Germany. You've redrawn a continent with charisma and cannonballs, and you're only 28. Paris doesn't know what to do with you. You return not as a man, but as a rumour made flesh. The streets whisper your name before your boots even touch cobblestones. Children salute you with sticks. Merchants raise prices because they know you'll walk by. You've left Italy dripping in glory and arrive in the capital like a comet, one part celestial wonder, one part dangerous trajectory. But here's the thing, the Directory, that committee of anxious bureaucrats and powdered mediocritators, doesn't trust you. Not one bit. You're too popular, too ambitious, too good at winning. They want heroes, yes, but ones they can dismiss after the parade. You, however, are nobody's decoration. You walk into rooms and the temperature drops, not out of fear, but because everyone stops breathing. Still, they can't ignore you, so they try to direct you elsewhere. How about Egypt, they suggest, like parents proposing Disneyland to a child too clever to fall for it. But you nod, because Egypt isn't exile, it's stagecraft. You've read your Julius Caesar, you've memorized your Alexander. The East is where great men go to become immortal. The pyramids aren't just monuments, they're backdrops. You want your silhouette carved into sand and memory, so you agree and plan and pack. But you don't just pack troops. No, you pack scholars, scientists, artists, a floating enlightenment in military boots. You're not just invading, you're curating an image. Your army is large, your ego larger. The fleet sails in silence, cutting through Mediterranean blues, toward a continent that's mostly rumour to your men and legend to you. Egypt greets you like an old book left open under the sun, dusty, vast, and misunderstood. You promise the locals freedom, reform, and respect, and then requisition their camels and ransack their granaries. It's not hypocrisy, it's strategy, or so you tell yourself. You take Alexandria, you march through sand, like it's Europe, with worse plumbing. You even visit the pyramids, stand in their shadow, and say something so theatrical your aides probably quote it in their journals. From the heights of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you. Poetic, if slightly overcompensating. But the dream stumbles. Nelson, the British admiral, with nerves of steel and impeccable timing, finds your fleet anchored at Aboukir Bay. In the Battle of the Nile, he shatters your ships and your illusion of invulnerability. You're stranded. The sea, once your highway, becomes a wall. Yet, you persist. You march into Syria poorly supplied, half sick, but determined to distract the British and prove a point. You take Jaffa, and after a siege, execute hundreds of Ottoman prisoners. The act is brutal, efficient, a war crime by modern standards. Historians still argue whether it was necessity or cruelty. You don't argue, you sleep fine. Then there's the plague. Not metaphorically, actual plague. Your men rot in hospitals, their moans cutting through desert silence. You visit them, famously touching the infected, as if daring death to notice. A painter back in France will immortalize it. You, reaching out like a saint in a field of sorrow. The brush lies, of course. You're no saint, but the myth doesn't care. Your campaign drags. Supplies dwindle. Morale frays. You begin to realize something horrific. You're stuck in a play without a finale. Egypt, so full of promise, has become a quagmire with hieroglyphs. Then comes the rumour. France is faltering. The Directory is collapsing into irrelevance. Royalists stir, Jacobins plot, and Paris, fickle, hungry Paris, might need saving again. And who better to save it than the man who once fired grapeshot into its streets? So without orders, without consultation, you leave. You abandon your army, not all of them, just the thousands who trusted you. You board a ship and slip away under the stars, carrying nothing but your closest allies, a few souvenirs, and the echo of dreams turned to dust. It's not heroic, it's not fair, but it's necessary, because back in France the curtain is rising on your next act, and you never did like second-hand scripts. You land to cheers. They don't know about the plague, the executions, or the desert failures. They only know the myth, and the myth still walks in boots. You step onto French soil not as a general returning in shame, but as a messiah arriving ahead of schedule. The directory, or what's left of it, is too disoriented to ask questions. The newspapers, conveniently edited by your loyalists, speak only of your brilliance, your victories, your sun-drenched campaign through exotic lands. Egypt has become a mirage, and you are its prophet. Failure doesn't stick if you control the ink. Paris is chaos again, not the festive cake-starved kind from 1789. This is tired chaos. France is broke, bickering, and bored of the revolution. Royalists want crowns, Jacobins want heads, the Directory wants a nap. What France really wants is order, and preferably order with excellent posture and a dramatic coat. So you plot. Of course you do. You've watched every regime since the monarchy fall over itself. You've learned that revolutions are only as stable as the boots standing on their necks. The Directory doesn't need reform, it needs retirement. You find your co-conspirators Emmanuel C.S., an ecclesiastic turned political daydreamer, and Talleyrand, that serpentine diplomat with more lives than a Parisian alley cat. They want a coup. You want a throne. It's a marriage of inconvenience wrapped in legalese. And thus the coup of 18 Brumaire, or, for those who don't speak Republican calendar, the 9th of November 7. It doesn't go smoothly. You're not exactly a silver-tongued orator. In fact, when you barge into the Council of 500 and try to inspire them, they boo you. One even lunges at you. You stumble backward. For a terrifying moment, it feels like theatre gone wrong, like you've forgotten your lines, and the extras have revolted. But then, Lucien, your brother, always dramatic, always clutching a dagger too conveniently, cries that you're under threat. Soldiers storm in, the legislators flee, and just like that, democracy takes a coffee break. You don't seize power with eloquence. You seize it with the clumsy inevitability of a man too useful to fail. And when the dust settles, you're named first consul. Not king, not emperor, not yet. Just the first among equals, with the emphasis on first and the equals nowhere in sight. You call it a republic, but it's got your handwriting all over it. 3 consuls, sure, but 2 of them are decorative. You make the laws. You appoint the ministers. You command the army. You approve the budgets. You even select the wallpaper, probably. And the people, they cheer. You offer them what they crave: stability, order, bread, and the illusion of participation. You ask them to vote in a plebiscite. Do you approve of the new constitution? 99% say yes, not because they read it, not because they understand it, but because you, the conquering hero, asked nicely. Historians still argue whether this was a power grab or a rescue mission, whether you were a savior or an opportunist. But you don't argue. You act. You set to work. First, the banks. France is broke, but you tame inflation with the dexterity of a man who's never balanced a checkbook. You centralize the treasury, create the Banque de France, and start printing stability. Then, the laws. You gather lawyers, nod solemnly, and out comes the Napoleonic Code, a tidy bundle of rules that still haunts European legal systems today. It's modern. It's rigid. It's very you. Women, you decide they're decorative, domestic, and entirely subordinate. Liberty, equality, fraternity, unless you're female, in which case, best to stay quiet and married. It's not ideal, but hey, you're busy. And then, the church. Ah, the Catholic Church, that ancient, smoky cathedral of power. You could crush it, but no, you're cleverer than that. You concorded it. You restore its dignity while keeping the leash tight. The Pope smiles, but you hold the pen. You give them religion but not the land, a theological sleight of hand, divine diplomacy. France settles, not into peace, exactly, but into predictability. Streets are safer, prices stabilize, people start dreaming again, not of revolution, but of normalcy. That and of you, their consul, their order-bringer, their short and sharp god of logic and war. And in the quiet, in the ticking rhythm of a country relearning how to breathe, you begin to feel something stir again. Ambition. Because first consul is nice, but it's not forever. And you've never been one for temporary titles. You don't rush it. No, that wouldn't be elegant. You let the idea simmer, like a fine reduction, thickening over time, growing more fragrant in the public's mind. First consul was always meant to be temporary, wasn't it? A transitional phase. But what if, and hear this in your own voice, with its inflection of mock humility, what if France needed you indefinitely? So you arrange another plebiscite. This one asks if you should be consul for life. A lifetime appointment. Not quite a throne, not quite a republic. The political equivalent of eating cake without calling it dessert. And the people, they nod, they sign, they cheer. The vote, cooked to perfection, comes back overwhelmingly in favor. Not even North Korean dictators could dream of numbers that clean. And with that your path clears. The throne you once walked around is now behind you, in front of you. A coronation, the most deliberate act of theatre since Julius Caesar played his last scene. The year is 1804. The Cathedral of Notre Dame smells of incense and quiet resentment. The Pope himself has made the journey, flown in like some sacred stage prop. He stands with tiara and trembling palms, ready to crown you Emperor of the French, not king too ancient, but emperor just ancient enough. Except you don't wait for him. You take the crown from his hands, gently, firmly, and place it on your own head, slowly, deliberately, as if to say, "Thanks, Holy Father, but I think I'll manage." Historians still argue whether this was an act of arrogance or premeditated messaging. But you know, it's not about religion, it's about narrative. You're telling the world that no one, not even God's emissary, gives you power. You take it, and everyone applauds. And just like that, you become the emperor of something larger than France. Expectation. The empire needs scaffolding, so you build. You revive aristocratic titles, barons, dukes, counts, but now they're yours to dispense, not inherited through some moth-ridden family tree. You create a court, sleek and modern, all gold braid and tight ceremony. You wear bees instead of lilies, symbols of industrious power. The monarchy is dead, long live you. Your family gets promotions too. Siblings become kings, queens, viceroys, whether they're capable or just breathing. You spread Bonapartes like a pandemic across Europe, one royal title at a time. Louis in Holland, Joseph in Naples, Jerome in Westphalia. It's not nepotism, it's dynastic efficiency. And France flourishes. Roads improve, schools blossom, the arts bask in state approval. The economy, ever your reluctant mistress, steadies, mostly because it's afraid to wobble under your stare. Even your enemies admit it, the man can govern. But the sword still whispers. Peace doesn't suit you, not really. It's too quiet, too diplomatic, too French. You need the thrill, the campaign tent, the map spread on a field table, the scent of gunpowder and destiny. So you prepare. Austria and Russia won't let your empire stand unchallenged. Britain, always lurking, funds any coalition with a grudge and a navy. You know they'll come, so you plan for them. And in 1805, your plans find their mark at Austerlitz. Ah, Austerlitz. A battle so perfect it could be bottled and sold to aspiring tyrants. You lure the Austro-Russian armies into a trap so elegant it should be carved in marble. They think your right flank is weak. You let them think that. Then, while they hurl themselves forward, you smash through their center like a surgeon wielding a sledgehammer. By nightfall, they're in full retreat. You, meanwhile, have redefined warfare. 3 hours. One decisive stroke. The world blinks. You stand, coat flapping in the winter wind, staring at the shattered alliance of old Europe. They'll never underestimate you again. Well, not until Russia. But we'll get there. For now, you ride the high. You mint coins with your profile. You commission paintings where you look taller. Statues rise. Cities kneel. You've bent a continent around your will, and your name is becoming a verb whispered across borders. Napoleoned, as in to be thoroughly, artfully dominated. And yet, deep down, under the medals and silk sashes, you feel it. The empire is yours. But empires don't sleep. They itch. They hunger. They demand. And you? You've never been good at stopping when the applause starts. You've conquered more than territory. You've conquered tempo. Europe plays by your beat now, and it is fast, unrelenting, symphonic. You don't march. You accelerate. While monarchs draft treaties, you redraw borders. While diplomats sip wine, you sip thunder. You've become a force of history with excellent taste in uniforms. But ambition doesn't just grow, it metastasizes into Spain. Ah yes, Spain, that land of sun, guitars, and absolutely no desire to be liberated by a French emperor. On paper, it's a fine idea. The Spanish monarchy is weak, the people disgruntled, and your brother Joseph is itching for a crown. So you do what any loving sibling would do. You strong-arm Spain into letting you replace its king with your own kin. What could go wrong? Well, everything. You see, Spaniards are many things. Romantic, proud, Catholic to the marrow. But passive is not one of them. You try to install enlightenment. They answer with daggers in the night and priests who bless bullets. What was meant to be a quick political maneuver becomes a national migraine. Guerrilla warfare. The term itself gets its boots dirty in the Iberian Peninsula. No open battles, just ambushes, sabotage, and peasants who stare too long before leading your men into a trap. The British, ever the opportunists, arrive under Wellington's surprisingly competent command and turn Portugal into a springboard for counter-invasion. For the first time in years, you're not just fighting monarchs, you're fighting an idea, resistance. You send more troops, then more. The peninsula becomes a drain of blood and coin. Every victory feels hollow, every town a funeral. Historians still argue whether you lost Spain or Spain lost you. One thing's clear, you've built an empire with lightning, but it's crumbling under rain. And yet you turn east. Because if Spain is a quagmire, Russia is a mirage, alluring, unreachable, and possibly filled with bears. Tsar Alexander was once your uneasy friend, made so at Tilsit, where you stood together on a raft, like the world's most dangerous fishing buddies, and carved up Europe with the ease of wedding cake. But alliances made on rafts don't float forever. Russia chafes under the continental system. Your economic blockade meant to starve Britain. It's less brilliant strategy and more mutual economic suffocation. Russia pulls away. You respond the only way you know, with horseshoes and gunpowder. In 1812, you gather your Grande Armée, over 600,000 soldiers, the largest force Europe has seen. It stretches from Poland to Portugal, a patchwork of languages, uniforms, and allegiances, a babel with bayonets. You cross the Niemen River like Caesar crossing the Rubicon, except it's colder, flatter, and the only thing awaiting you is logistical disaster. The march is long, supplies vanish, roads disappear, the Russians retreat, burning everything, food, shelter, hope. It's a slow chess game, where you realize too late that your opponent is sacrificing pieces just to freeze you out, and still you reach Moscow, except it's empty. The city smoulders with a bitter kind of welcome. Its inhabitants are gone, fires spread. You enter a capital that behaves like a ghost. No surrender, no peace, just ashes. You wait. 1 week, 2. You write letters to Tsar Alexander, offering treaties, peace, decency, silence. You even consider turning Moscow into your winter headquarters, but you can feel the cold sharpening outside your tent, whispering secrets about frostbite. Winter arrives early, like betrayal, and then the retreat begins. It's not a retreat, it's an unraveling. Roads turn to sludge, horses collapse, fingers blacken, boots crack, the Grande Armée dissolves like sugar in snow, Cossacks harass your flanks, hunger becomes your most disciplined adversary, soldiers strip corpses for boots, men fight over dead rats, you ride near the front, face locked in that imperial grimace, but inside, you know, this is your reckoning. From 600,000, fewer than 100,000 make it out. And you? You survive. Of course you do. History isn't done with you yet. You cross the Berezina River, not with triumph but with grim teeth and frozen breath. Behind you, the carcass of ambition. Ahead, Europe, watching, whispering, calculating. They smell blood, but you smell Paris. And you turn your horse homeward. Paris doesn't greet you with the thunder of cannons or the swelling of crowds this time. It greets you with silence, the kind that falls after the curtain drops and no one claps. The Russian campaign hasn't just singed your empire, it's singed your myth. The once invincible Napoleon, master of Austerlitz, now looks a little less immortal, a little more human. But you don't crumble. No, you pivot. That's always been your trick, hasn't it? When the map turns red with failure, you sketch a new map. You rush back into administration, into the illusion of normalcy. You gather what remains of your armies, call up more conscripts, mere boys, half-trained, many half-fed, and rebuild a force out of desperation and belief. But belief's foundation is cracking. Across Europe, your enemies sense it. The Sixth Coalition forms like storm clouds. Russia, Prussia, Austria, Britain, even Sweden, because why not? They smell your weakness, like wolves sniffing out a limping stag, and they move quickly. The battles come like a hailstorm. Lutzen, Bautzen, Dresden, each one a flash of your old brilliance. You win some, stagger in others. You pull off maneuvers that textbooks still drool over, but your army is hollowing. Your veterans are bones. Your horses are ghosts. And then Leipzig. Ah, Leipzig. The Battle of Nations. Over 500,000 men. A clashing of drums and mud and flags, of languages and loyalties, all tangled in cannon smoke. It's your largest battle and your worst. Your allies abandon you mid-fight. Saxons turn their cannons around. Bridges explode beneath retreating feet. You escape, barely, coat tattered, eyes harder than ever. But you've been exposed. The spell is broken. France is no longer a fortress. It's a house with too many doors and too few guards. The Allies march west. Your generals, once loyal, start to glance sideways. The Senate, once rubber-stamped and obedient, begins whispering alternatives. Back home, you try to rally. You kiss your son's forehead. You touch Josephine's portrait. You dig deep, down to that core of steel that made you Napoleon in the first place. In early 1814, you unleash a campaign across French soil that defies logic. 6 weeks of brilliance. You win battle after battle, with forces a fraction of your enemies. You fight like a man who remembers the taste of glory and won't let it go quietly. But the numbers don't lie. They never did. Paris falls. You weren't even there. Your city, the heart of your empire, surrendered behind your back. The Allies march in, not as liberators, but as managers cleaning up someone else's mess. The Senate turns coat so fast it creates a draft. They demand your abdication. And for the first time you pause. Not long, but enough. You consider burning it all, raising the tricolour over the Alps, rallying what's left, but the war has eaten too much. The people are tired, France is tired, and somewhere deep inside, so are you. So you abdicate. You say goodbye, not with a scream, but a whisper. At Fontainebleau, you bid farewell to the old guard. You kiss the regimental flag, Grown men weep. And then, with the flick of your greatcoat, you step into exile. To Elba, a tiny island, humbling, almost cute. They give you the title Emperor still, because stripping it would feel too cruel, like kicking a lion once it's caged. And there, in exile, you do something strange. You govern. You build roads, reform the economy, draft local laws. It's ridiculous. You run Elba like it's France in miniature, as if ambition can't shrink, only resize. Historians still argue whether you ever truly accepted exile, whether you stared out at the horizon, dreaming of return, or whether you already had a plan. But you don't argue. You wait. You watch Europe congratulate itself. You watch Louis XV, pudgy and uncertain, plop himself on your throne like a dog trying to drive a carriage. You watch old enemies become too comfortable. And then, one night, you board a ship. You're not done. Not yet. You return not with an army, but with a whisper. It begins as a murmur in the hills of southern France. He's back. Your ship lands on the beach near Gulf Juan, and from there, your journey north isn't a military campaign, it's a resurrection. No flags, no cannons, just footsteps. You march toward Paris with a handful of men, a comically small band by imperial standards, but somehow each step swells your numbers. The old soldiers, the peasants, even officers who had sworn allegiance to the Bourbon king, they join you, not because they believe in your invincibility anymore, but because they remember how it felt when France believed in something. At Laffrey, you meet a royalist regiment sent to arrest you. You walk toward them alone, open your coat, and say, "If any of you would shoot your emperor, shoot him now." No one does. They cheer. You've turned exile into legend. Again, by the time you enter Paris, the king has already fled. Louis XV packs his royal dignity into a carriage and scurries to Ghent. The tricolour is raised, your son is named heir. The empire, dead for 11 months, rises again in what history calls the 100 Days. But this empire isn't made of granite and oak. It's papier-mâché, held together with hope, fear, and very little sleep. You race to consolidate power. You make reforms, concessions, speeches. You promise peace with Europe, with your people, even with time itself. No one believes you. The Allies, who had barely finished their champagne, drop their flutes and reach for swords. Britain, Austria, Prussia, Russia, they form the 7th Coalition, the seriously you again alliance. They move fast, like a muscle memory of war. You know you can't wait for them to come to France. So you go to them. You choose Belgium, that soggy crossroads of empires, where the fate of Europe has always hung like laundry in the rain. You hope to strike quickly, separate your enemies, defeat them piecemeal, before they consolidate. You still believe in momentum. You win at Ligny. You crush the Prussians. But your old magic falters, delays, indecision, muddy roads. Grouchy fails to pursue the retreating Prussians. Blücher recovers faster than expected. And then there's Waterloo. Even the name sounds ominous. You stand atop a ridge facing Wellington's Anglo-Allied army. The field is wet, your men exhausted. You begin late, too late. Historians still argue whether waiting for the ground to dry cost you the day, but it's more than weather. Wellington is defensive, unflinching. His lines hold. You throw in cavalry, artillery, your elite. Hougoumont, La Haye-Sainte, every farmhouse becomes a fortress. You hurl men like dice, and they fall like dominoes. And then, from the east, the Prussians arrive. Not reinforcements, not allies, just inevitability in black uniforms. The field collapses. You commit your Imperial Guard, the very symbol of your reign, the veterans, the invincibles. They march with pride, they return broken. La Garde recule, someone shouts. The Guard is retreating. And with that, so is everything. You ride away from the battlefield, mud splashed on your boots, your face drawn in shadow. You know what this means, not just a defeat, the end. You return to Paris, not with triumph, but with silence. You try, briefly, to marshal support, to rally another stand. But even you know, when the music stops, you abdicate again. This time not to your son, not to a dream, but to history. You ask to go to America, to live quietly, perhaps write your memoirs. The British smile and offer you a different island. One farther, one harsher. Saint Helena, Napoleon Bonaparte, twice an emperor, twice undone, is now a guest of wind and stone. The ship rocks gently as it crosses the Atlantic, but you remain still, a marble statue in a greatcoat, staring into a horizon that refuses to blink back. You're not going to America. You're not even going somewhere with a decent cafe. You're going to St. Helena, a volcanic pebble dropped in the South Atlantic, halfway between nowhere and obscurity. The British don't trust you to vanish politely. They learned their lesson. No Elba this time. No Mediterranean villas. No local governments to reform. Just cliffs, clouds, and imperial babysitters. Longwood House becomes your new palace. It's damp, cold, and full of rats. Not metaphorical ones, unfortunately. The ceilings leak. The wind howls. Your bathtub is the most luxurious feature, and even that feels like a coffin with plumbing. You're 46 years old, and you've ruled continents. Now your days are filled with arguing about milk rations, and the precise distance guards can stand from your windows. But you don't fade. You refuse. You write. Memoirs, letters, speeches no one will hear. You dictate your version of the empire to a handful of loyal followers who act as secretaries, courtiers, and occasional therapists. You retell your life as you wish it to be remembered, not just as a string of battles, but as a vision, a necessary storm in an age that mistook dust for order. You become your own mythographer, and yet reality creeps in. Your health declines. The British governor Hudson Lowe treats you with cold suspicion, regulating your every breath. He won't call you emperor. He calls you General Bonaparte. You respond by calling him that bureaucratic mosquito. Diplomacy, even now, remains a blood sport. Your stomach aches grow worse. You suspect cancer, or poison, or both. Historians still argue, as they always will, over what truly killed you. Arsenic in the wallpaper, a Habsburg plot, or just the slow attrition of memory. But the body keeps score. Still the mind wanders. You recount Austerlitz in exquisite detail. You relive Marengo move by move, like a game of chess against ghosts. You speak of Josephine, though she is gone. You dream of your son, whom you'll never see again. The King of Rome, once heir to your empire, now a ward of the Austrians, raised as a Habsburg prince with a French name and no French future. Your final years become a strange theatre. The world outside debates your legacy, tyrant or titan, saviour or scourge, while you pace your damp halls, rehearsing lines for an audience of eternity. You give your final orders. Bury me by the Seine, among the people I loved. They don't listen. Not yet. That will come later. The pain sharpens. You fade by degrees. May 5th, 1821. You ask for a crucifix. You ask for silence. And then you are gone. Not with thunder, not with cannon fire. Just a breath. And yet, a century later, tourists will visit your tomb beneath the dome of Les Invalides. They will crane their necks. They will whisper. Some will curse. Some will weep. Others will salute. Because you were never just a man. You were an era. Death, it turns out, is not the end. Not for you. Your body lies in St. Helena's soil, sure, but your shadow begins to grow the moment your heart stops beating, while the British soldiers sip their tea and scratch their heads over what to do with a legacy that refuses to lie still. Your legend embarks on its second campaign, this time against oblivion. The French mourn you with a complexity only France could manage. You were once their emperor, their curse, their liberator, their oppressor. Now, you are their memory. The Bourbon monarchy, restored and self-conscious, doesn't exactly hold national vigils, but something stirs. The people talk, the soldiers remember, songs are sung, posters appear, and somewhere your name becomes less a historical footnote and more a symbol of what might have been. Your friends, well, what's left of them, fight to restore your reputation. Las Cases, Gorgor, Bertrand, they write down every sigh, every anecdote, every moment you looked wistfully at the Atlantic. They edit, they embellish, they elevate. And why not? Every empire deserves a poet. Your memoirs, dictated in that damp prison, reach France like smuggled treasure. They're passed hand to hand, censored of course, but the words get through. You tell your story your way, noble, strategic, tragic. A man misunderstood by kings and betrayed by the very civilization he sought to save. Historians still argue whether your memoirs are fact or fiction, but readers don't care. They aren't reading to learn, they're reading to believe. Meanwhile, Europe twists. The old monarchies, once so smugly seated on their thrones, find themselves wobbling under the weight of revolutions. Your ghost walks in the streets of 1830, and again in 18... Wherever there is an uprising, someone inevitably cries your name. You've become the patron saint of ambition. And then in 1840, nearly 2 decades after your death, France decides you should come home. They call it le retour des cendres, the return of the ashes. But let's be clear, it's more than symbolism. It's a political act, a gamble by King Louis-Philippe to curry favour with the people by inviting their emperor. Your remains, meticulously exhumed under British supervision, are transported aboard a French frigate. There's ceremony, there's mourning, there's something almost theatrical in the way your coffin crosses the sea again, as if retracing a ghostly path in reverse. On December 15th, 1840, your coffin arrives in Paris. Millions gather. It rains naturally. Your sarcophagus, immense, crimson, polished, is placed under the golden dome of Les Invalides. It is not a tomb, it's a shrine. People speak in hushed tones. Hats are removed, and even your enemies, long dead or long silenced, cannot argue with the fact that you have outlived them. From here your story diverges. You are studied in war colleges from Moscow to West Point. You are quoted in boardrooms, misquoted on motivational posters. Your military strategies are still debated, still diagrammed, still dissected. Some see you as a dictator, others as a genius. And let's not forget the copycats. Every few decades, someone tries to be the next you. They wear your hat, mimic your march, even copy your stare. But they forget the essential thing. You didn't conquer with uniforms. You conquered with belief in yourself, in destiny, in France. They imitate your posture, but not your purpose. You, meanwhile, become furniture in the house of history, always there, always looming, always inviting the question, what if? And at night, when all is quiet, when museums lock their doors and history books close their covers, you still whisper through the marble halls, I was more than a man. I was a storm in the shape of a soldier. Time, my dear emperor, is a strange enemy, the only one you couldn't outmaneuver, and yet somehow you've made peace with it, sort of, while your bones rest beneath the gilded dome. Your image does not. It marches, paints, argues, and even snacks across the centuries, refusing to stay still. France keeps wrestling with your ghost like it's a national sport. Are you a tyrant who sold liberty for empire, or a liberator who gave order to chaos? Were you a Caesar reborn, or just an opportunist with great PR? Historians still argue, because arguing about you is easier than agreeing about anything else. Meanwhile, your statues stand in city squares, puffed up with dignity, sometimes pelted with pigeons, but never forgotten. There you are, hand in coat, gaze to horizon, the very essence of command. And in classrooms from Lyon to Louisiana, they still teach your name before they teach most presidents. Strange, isn't it? For a man who hated standing still, you've become everywhere. Romantic poets adored you. They saw your fall not as failure, but as poetic inevitability. Byron practically wept in verse over your exile, making you less a general and more a Greek tragedy with medals. Painters rendered your life in swaths of drama, crossing the Alps like Moses with better boots. And composers, they wrote symphonies for you, then crossed your name out in protest, then put it back in, because, well, music is dramatic like that. And then there's the Napoleonic Code, your quieter empire. Not born in battle, but in paper. You rewrote the legal DNA of France and beyond, injecting clarity, centralization, and a rather patriarchal view of family life. Yes, modern sensibilities squint at your gender policies, but your civil code, it still governs parts of the world. Tunisia, Quebec, even Louisiana whisper your clauses. Few rulers leave armies. Fewer still leave laws. You also left a family. Sort of. Your brothers tried to inherit your fire, but mostly just smoked. Joseph ruled Spain like a substitute teacher with a pronunciation problem. Louis, poor Louis, fathered your son, but couldn't quite handle the whole King of Holland thing. And Jerome, let's just say Prussia still winces. Your son, the one you called the King of Rome, never truly ruled. Raised by Austrians, wrapped in velvet and irony, he died young, more symbol than sovereign. They called him Laglon, the eaglet, a bird that never flew, but who carried your shadow like a feathered ghost. And you flit through fiction like a guest who never leaves. In novels, you appear as a cameo, a storm cloud, a dream. Tolstoy makes you a character. Hugo makes you a cause. You are a literary device with a bayonet. And let's not pretend you haunt politics too. Hitler studied your campaigns. Churchill admired your command. De Gaulle borrowed your gravitas, minus the horses. Every would-be strongman tries on your cape, like a child playing dress-up. But none of them have your stride, that blend of mathematics and myth, of ego and execution. Because that's the real thing, isn't it? You didn't just conquer land, you conquered narrative. You understood beforemost that power isn't just taken, it's told. You turned bulletins into legend. You shaped how people saw you, how they remembered you. You built monuments before the paint was dry on the battlefield. And so here we are, 2 centuries later, and the world still argues about your height, still draws inspiration from your victories, still gasps at your losses, still names things after you, streets, ships, sandwiches. And yes, someone once made an ice cream flavor called Napoleon 3-in-1, because why choose? You would have rolled your eyes, then eaten it anyway. You, my restless emperor, have become a paradox in boots, a man of war who created laws, a devout manipulator of Enlightenment ideals, a revolutionary who crowned himself monarch. The world doesn't know whether to salute you or psychoanalyze you, and perhaps that's your greatest victory, being endlessly debatable. But here's the thing, history doesn't stay still, and neither does your reputation. In some decades, you're the hero of the people, the man who brought order out of revolution. In others, you're a cautionary tale with medals, a warmonger in fancy hats. The pendulum swings with each new book, each new war, each new fragile government, looking for a mirror or a monster. And still, you endure. Schools name halls after you. Armies teach your flanking maneuvers. Economists reference your banking reforms. Even urban planners owe you for wide boulevards in Paris, built less for aesthetics. More so cannons could sweep away mobs. Practicality always. And then came cinema. Ah, film. That glimmering parade of shadow and light. Of course you were going to end up there. How could you not? You're pure drama. Horses, battles, betrayals, exile. It's as if your life was storyboarded before celluloid existed. Directors dream of capturing you. Some succeed for a scene, others fail gloriously. Kubrick tried, spent years researching, amassed index cards, scripts, dreams he never finished. Maybe you were too big, even for him. Maybe the camera couldn't fit your ambition in the frame. Later, Moore would try Montaldo, Guitry, Gantz. Each time you change. Sometimes you're charming, sometimes you're terrifying, sometimes you're played by actors, clearly too tall. Even now, they're trying again. Scripts circulate, costumes are stitched, and someone, somewhere, is asking, but what was he really like? As if anyone could answer that without slipping into fiction. Because, honestly, you stopped being just Napoleon the day you became a symbol. You became a cipher. Each generation projects onto you what it most needs: a hero, a villain, a genius, a fool. You are a lens through which we examine ambition and fear and glory, our glory. You chased it like a lover, slept next to it, woke up and found it gone, and then chased it again. Your life is proof that greatness never sleeps, even if it occasionally naps in exile. You're quoted in self-help books now. Impossible is a word found only in the dictionary of fools. That one's yours, supposedly. Though historians still argue. Maybe you said it, maybe someone thought you should have. Either way, it's printed on posters, gym walls, and startup PowerPoints. Your voice co-opted by ambition's latest recruits. They build apps, you build empires. They scale startups. You scaled the Alps. But let's not judge, because you too knew the hunger of building something no one believed you could. You too stood in rooms where everyone expected you to fail. You proved them wrong, then right, then wrong again. And even today in Paris, school children are taught your name before they understand the word legacy, not because they should become you, but because they should know that one man once believed, truly madly dangerously, that he could bend time around his will. And for a moment, he did. Somewhere in a quiet archive, there's a clerk staring at your handwriting, the sweeping confidence of your pen, the impatient slant of your letters. They pause, perhaps smile. It's a little thing, but you're still reaching through paper, through centuries. You're still speaking. And that, more than all the cannons and crowns, might be your true immortality. Because the further history drifts from your footsteps, the more fascinated it becomes with the rhythm of them. No longer just the strategist or sovereign. You become the man, the boy from Corsica, the lonely cadet at Brienne, the husband who obsessed over Josephine's letters like a teenager texting at 2 a.m. Historians, poor souls, comb through every sigh, every scribble. They reconstruct your menus. They argue about your hat. They diagram your psychology. Some call you a narcissist, others a genius who simply had no time for small talk. You might have been both, or neither. You contain contradictions, like most people contain ribs. And then there's your private life. Josephine. Ah, Josephine. Your letters to her are soft, where your proclamations were sharp. You write like a man trying to outrun longing. I awake filled with you, you once said. Your image and the memory of last night's intoxicating pleasures have left no rest to my senses. Calm down, General. It's 1796, not a romance novel. Still, that ache, real or theatrical, makes you feel startlingly human. You weren't just marching across Europe. You were also wondering whether your wife had received your 6th letter, whether she still wore your ring, whether she whispered your name when the lights were out. But time, that old enemy again, changed things. You divorced her. For politics, for heirs, for France. Yet you kept her portrait near until the end. Historians still argue whether you ever loved anyone else quite the same. Maybe, maybe not. Your second wife, Marie-Louise, gave you a son, the King of Rome, the the child of empire, but not of affection. She returned to Vienna, you to history, and your son, raised among Habsburg chandeliers, taught to think of you as a mistake that once wore a crown. Still, there's an aching symmetry to it all. The emperor who built dynasties and never truly had a home. But let's not get too sentimental. You would have hated that, or pretended to, because what always drove you was motion, projects, reforms, maps. You weren't content just being remembered. You wanted to shape the remembering. That's why you micromanaged your image like a modern-day brand manager. You had official portraits retouched to look more imperial. You staged victories in ink before the cannon smoke cleared. You even dictated memoirs from exile, knowing full well that the last word is often the loudest. And you were right. You get quoted more than Talleyrand, painted more than Louis XVI, remembered more kindly than half the monarchs you deposed. Which raises the uncomfortable question, were you right too much? Because there is a danger to your kind of genius. You set the precedent that will haunt generations. The idea that one person, just one, can steer the world if only they're smart enough, ruthless enough, charismatic enough. Spoiler, they can't. But they'll try, because you did. And somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of drums echoes across time, because every generation produces a new would-be conqueror, and they all whisper your name, not always aloud, but always inside. Not because they want to be you, but because they want what you had for a moment, the world, trembling in your palm. Let's be honest, you always did have impeccable timing. When you arrived, France was gasping. Revolution had eaten its children. The monarchy was a headless memory, and every political experiment seemed allergic to stability. Enter you, not with the blood of kings, but with the posture of one, not elected, exactly, but accepted. With a sword in one hand and a law code in the other, you offered France what it craved more than liberty, structure. It's strange, isn't it? How chaos always invites order, even the kind that buttons up in epaulets. And you gave it to them. Order, that is. You redrew maps, rewrote laws, restructured schools, recalibrated time. You reorganized France, like a man tidying a cluttered desk, except the desk was a continent. Your fingerprints remain, the Bank of France, the Legion of Honor, that little invention called the baccalaureate. You even had an opinion about how people should name their kids. Too many classical references, not enough Napoleons. You didn't govern, you curated. But here's the rub, no order lasts forever, not even yours. Because every system you build comes with a shadow, the expectation that it must be maintained. And when it starts to crack, people don't blame the structure, they blame the architect. Which brings us, awkwardly, to your decline. You once moved armies like chess pieces, but by 1812 you were playing checkers with icicles. Russia, the great misstep. Historians still argue whether your ambition outpaced your reason, or whether it was just bad luck and colder than expected winters. Either way, the retreat turned glory to frostbite. You left Moscow, not with a victory, but with echoes and ash. And yet, even in retreat, you wrote drama. That's the thing about you. Your defeats were as spectacular as your triumphs. They had flair, panache. Even the disasters came with epic soundtracks. By the time the Allies reached Paris, your legend had split in two, the man and the myth. The man surrendered. The myth rallied. You went quietly to Elba, that speck of rock dressed up as an island. They gave you a court, a flag, a few hundred soldiers, as if that would occupy you, as if the man who once mapped Europe could be contained by a coastline. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. And here's the part that still baffles historians and bedtime storytellers alike, the escape. You didn't sneak out under cover of darkness. You sailed straight back to France, like a plot twist nobody believed. Troops sent to arrest you instead bowed. Villagers wept, and Paris prepared the throne again. 100 days. That's all you got. just long enough to remind everyone why they loved you and why they couldn't keep you. Waterloo wasn't just a battle, it was a punctuation mark. Not a period, exactly, more like an ellipsis. The empire fell, again, this time with more mud, more cannonballs, and fewer illusions. And when they exiled you to St. Helena, they meant it. No court, no theatrics, just wind, rock, and memory. And yet you made it matter. You dictated, you reflected, you mythologized. You prepared your legacy like a man planting flags for a future army, the readers. Because if you couldn't win on the battlefield anymore, you'd win in the library. And that's exactly what you did. St. Helena. Even the name sounds tired. A final, lonely syllable at the end of your sentence. The island was small, the conversations smaller, the rocks whispered more than the people. And yet there you were, once the terror of Europe, now pacing a veranda with a telescope, peering toward a horizon that no longer bowed to you. Did you expect that end? Maybe not. But then endings were never really your forte. You preferred beginnings, grand ones, loud ones that arrived with fanfare and cavalry. St. Helena, by contrast, was a whisper, a cough, a rain-soaked curtain call in front of an indifferent sea. Still, you made it yours. You turned a volcanic prison into your final court. You summoned your scribes. You relived campaigns, gave orders to shadows, rehearsed speeches no one would hear. The rocks became battlements, the wind your last orchestra, and the memories, oh, the memories. You recited them like scripture. Marengo, Austerlitz, Jena, even Moscow, frozen in regret. They say you rewrote some of it, made the defeats more noble, the victories more inevitable. Well, of course you did. You were building your greatest monument, your version of events. History was no longer a chronicle, it was a performance. And you were the playwright, director, and star. But it wasn't all prose and poetry. Your health, like your empire, began to crumble. Stomach pains, fatigue, the creeping erosion of vitality. Your doctors were baffled, or careless, or both. Historians still argue. Was it cancer, poison, stress, the slow revenge of salted meat and exile? It hardly mattered. You, who once reshaped nations in days, now measured victories in breaths. And yet, you endured. You took walks when you could, stared at maps you could no longer command. Sometimes you spoke of Josephine, as if memory could warm you. Other times you clung to silence, wrapping it around yourself like a worn-out uniform. You had servants, yes, a few loyal officers, a few grudges carefully preserved. Even in confinement, you played politics. Reports filtered back to Europe, tales of mistreatment, of British cruelty. Maybe they were true, maybe they were embellished, but you understood. Suffering, when properly framed, is a powerful tool. Martyrdom, when worn well, is just another form of crown. You didn't just die on St. Helena. You ascended. Not literally, of course. Your body failed like anyone else's. But your idea that lived on. The man who once stood in front of thousands, commanding with a single gesture, now commanded something stranger, the imagination of a world. Your death in 1821 was quiet. No trumpets, no cavalry, just a fading man in a damp room. You wore a green uniform, they say, the same you wore at Austerlitz, because even in death you wanted to look like victory. They buried you beneath a willow, a simple grave, unmarked by name. Napoleon, it would eventually say, as if that were enough, as if anything else needed saying. And it was, it really was. Because you'd already written your name into every margin of the 19th century. No longer flesh, but symbol. No longer soldier, but story. And St. Helena, just the final stage. The quiet theatre from which your legend took flight. Now the strange part begins. The afterlife, not of your soul, but of your image. Because you, dear Bonaparte, didn't just die and fade. You expanded, like ink and water, like myth across generations. They came for you long after your body stopped breathing. 19 years after you died, France decided it wasn't enough for you to be buried on some remote speck in the Atlantic. No, they needed you back. The people, or perhaps the politicians, wanted closure or spectacle, or both, so they launched Le Retour des Cendres, the return of your ashes. But really, it was the return of your power, of your spell. They exhumed your body, surprisingly well preserved if we believe the reports, and then they paraded it, like a relic, through stormy seas, up the Seine into the heart of Paris, a procession of silence, of music, of tears rehearsed like theatre. The French, ever dramatic, didn't just rebury you, they restaged you. And where did they put you? Les Invalides, a tomb beneath golden domes, ornate, grand, fit for a pharaoh with excellent public relations. You lie now at the centre of the building, in a red quartzite sarcophagus, as if even in death you required strategy. Visitors must descend to gaze upon you, heads bowed not in prayer, but in awe. It worked, sort of, because from that point on, you stopped belonging to yourself. You became French identity, Republican pride, imperial nostalgia, a lesson, a warning, a meme. Each new regime reinterpreted you, the July monarchy, the Second Empire, the Third Republic. You were used, reused, recycled, a legend turned national Rorschach test. And then came the relatives. Your nephew, Louis Napoleon, the man with the moustache and the ambition, used your name like a golden key. He promised to restore your legacy. He promised greatness. He eventually delivered, for a while, another empire, until he too stumbled in a war, this time against Prussia. And just like that, the Bonapartes were demoted back to mere mortals. But you kept ascending. Historians still argue whether your legacy helped or hindered France's future. Did you leave the nation stronger or more fragmented? Did your reforms stabilize the state or sow the seeds of authoritarianism? Are you a cautionary tale or a blueprint? The debate never ends, because every time someone tries to summarize you, you slither out of the frame. You're not easy. You were never easy. You were the revolution's child who became its contradiction, a general who crowned himself, a patriot who abandoned his army, a man who wrote laws and broke rules and cried over his first wife and executed prisoners of war. You contain multitudes, most of them contradictory. But that's the point, isn't it? You are the perfect subject for a bedtime story, because bedtime stories aren't about clarity, they're about mystery. They let us drift between truth and imagination, wrapped in the soft comfort of maybe. And you, Napoleon, are the emperor of maybe. Maybe you are a genius, maybe a tyrant, maybe both, probably both. And still, in quiet rooms, people say your name with a sigh. Teachers try to explain you. Students write essays about your impact. Lovers quote your letters. Generals copy your maps. Children wear hats shaped like yours at costume parties, not knowing the weight they mimic. You've become the idea of ambition. And like all great ideas, you outlived the man who birthed them. But even ideas, grand as they are, begin to gather dust if left untouched. And yet you somehow never did. Every few decades, someone rediscovers you, brushes off the cobwebs, adjusts your bicorn, and says, you know who was really interesting? Napoleon. And just like that, you're back. In novels, they romanticize you. You become a brooding figure on a cliff, cloak flapping in the wind, eyes scanning the horizon for some invisible future. In paintings, you're taller than life, literally. Artists kept stretching you until your stature matched your legacy. In reality, you were about 5'6", average for your time, but history prefers you, majestic. In films, you stride into frame with orchestras swelling behind you. The camera lingers on your silhouette, because nothing says epic like a man standing still while the world prepares to change. Directors adore you, writers idolize you, even comedians poke fun at your supposed short temper and strategic monologues, and somehow that too keeps you alive. But then there's the serious stuff, the academics, the thinkers who unpack your every move, like archaeologists dusting off ancient bones. They draw timelines and arrows. They debate whether your reforms truly modernized France or simply concentrated power. They argue about the Code Napoleon, whether it liberated the people or merely shackled them under legal bureaucracy with better grammar. They scrutinize your wars, your treaties, your betrayals, the Spanish campaign, a quagmire, a bleeding wound, Russia, an ice-coated tragedy, Waterloo. Well, even your defenders struggle to dress that up, and still they find themselves impressed. Because despite everything, the dead, the exiles, the empires crushed beneath your heel, there's a rhythm to your rise that's hard to resist. You were the outsider who rewrote the rules, the tactician who saw not just the battlefield, but the story behind it. You didn't just want to win, you wanted to reshape the narrative. And that's what sticks. Because you understood maybe better than anyone that history is less about what happened and more about what people choose to remember, and you helped them choose. Every statue they build is a whisper of your will. Every essay is a battlefield where your ghost still maneuvers. And somehow you remain a question mark where most men become footnotes. But legacy, like empires, is delicate, and as the centuries roll on, your figure has begun to flicker, not vanish, just blur. New generations grow up with different myths, different icons. They know your name, but maybe not your story, maybe just the hat, maybe just the wars. And yet, there's always one student, one reader, one dreamer who falls into your orbit like a moth to gunpowder, who reads your story late at night and feels something spark, not agreement, not admiration, but curiosity, a flicker, a what if. Because you, Napoleon, are not a lesson, you're an invitation to dream big, to dare, to risk, to fail, and then to write about it as if failure had never happened. And so here we are, you, or at least the you we've carried through memory, standing at the hazy edge of relevance, still casting a long, curious shadow. Even now, long after the smoke of your cannons has cleared, after the horses have stopped charging, after the treaties have yellowed with age, we still find ourselves circling back. Because you weren't just a man in history. You were the question history keeps asking. What does it mean to lead? To command not just armies, but belief. To shape a people's future, or claim to. Modern states still echo your vision. Bureaucracies, ministries, metric systems. The fingerprints are unmistakable. Your civil code became the DNA of more than just France. It seeped into Europe, then the world. Pieces of you live in courtrooms, in currencies, in calendars. You might have died on a damp rock in the middle of nowhere, but you live in the structure of now. Yet, the irony, all that structure was born from chaos, from revolution, from fracture, from the storming of bastilles and the rolling of guillotines. You emerged from that turbulence like a signal flare, promising order, glory, destiny, and for a while you delivered, but only by dancing on the knife's edge between genius and overreach. So people keep asking, was it worth it? Were the laws and schools and rights of man worth the blood soaked into the snow of Austerlitz, the bones littering the roads out of Moscow, the despair in Spanish villages turned to cinders? Historians still argue. Of course they do. Because you are the perfect storm, a self-made monarch, born of a republic, a modernizer with a medieval crown, a man of Enlightenment principles who ruled by the sword. You are, by nature, a contradiction, and contradictions are catnip for scholars. You've become more symbol than memory, a canvas on which every era paints its anxieties. In the 19th century you were the hero of liberal nationalism, proof that a man of merit could conquer the old world. In the 20th, a cautionary tale of centralized power and the cult of personality. And in the 21st, you're a meme, a trivia answer, a name wrapped in myth, shaped into TikToks and documentaries. But here's the quiet truth that lingers as midnight thickens. You were never just any of those things. You were a boy from Corsica with an obsession for maps, a man who read Plutarch under candlelight and dreamed of glory not yet written. You stumbled, bled, laughed, and loved, sometimes deeply, sometimes strategically. You spoke of liberty and crushed rebellions. You kissed Josephine and remarried for dynasty. You looked at the stars and redrew the earth. And in the end, like all great stories, yours bends not toward clarity, but toward mystery. You are not the end of an era. You are its echo. So now, as your tale glides toward silence, we return not to your wars, nor your laws, nor even your tomb, but to the simplest image of all. You, alone on St. Helena, staring at the sea, no orders to give, no maps to read, just the wind, the waves, and the weight of a life that somehow outran itself. You pace the veranda, not with the urgency of conquest, but with the rhythm of reflection. The same legs that once led charges across frozen rivers now shuffle slowly between rooms. You speak less, though your mind runs marathons, dissecting, justifying, narrating. You polish the past until it gleams. Even your regrets come wrapped in clever phrasing. And still, in quiet moments, you wonder, did they ever really understand you? The generals, the lovers, the enemies, the chroniclers, did they ever see the boy beneath the medals, the poet beneath the commander? You were always more than your legend, more than your losses or your laurels, and yet the world kept flattening you into a symbol, easy to carry, easier to sell. So you made peace with that, or tried to. You wrote your story one last time, not for truth but for survival, not of you, but of the idea of you, because if history would talk, you would at least choose the tone, the pace, the punctuation. Even now, they recite your final words like sacred text. France, army, head of the army, Josephine. Were you delirious? Maybe. Were you rehearsing? Always. You spoke in ellipses, not endings, because you never believed in finality, not for someone like you. Empires collapse, thrones crumble, but dreams drift. And here you are, still drifting, through textbooks and bedtime tales, through statues and street names, through whispered comparisons in military academies and nervous boardrooms, because every time someone dares too much, reaches too far, or loves too foolishly, they evoke you, maybe not by name, but by spirit. You haunt not as ghost, but as ambition incarnate. So sleep now, Bonaparte. Let the boots rest. Let the medals fade. Let the silence embrace what cannon fire never could. And let those who remember you do so, not with awe, but with a quiet, reflective smile, the kind reserved for stories that don't quite fit in history's tidy boxes. Because you, Napoleon, were never just a man. You are a mirror, a myth, a maybe. And now, my dear listener, the cannons have grown silent. The hooves no longer thunder. The empire, like the evening, has gently faded into shadow. You've journeyed through a life stitched together with victories and mistakes, wrapped in ambition and irony, remembered with reverence and rebellion. You've stood in icy Russian snow and golden Parisian salons. You've heard the cheers of armies and the silence of exile. And maybe, just maybe, you've seen a glimpse of yourself in it all, in the restless hunger, in the need to be more, in the desire to write something, anything, that lingers after the last breath. But that can wait. Tonight there are no empires to build, no maps to redraw, just the gentle weight of a blanket, the rhythm of your breath, and the soft memory of a world once ruled by dreams dressed as generals. Let the questions sleep, let the battles rest, let the legend of Napoleon drift backward into the still sea of history where it belongs, stirring gently beneath the surface, never quite forgotten. And if in your dreams you find yourself on a quiet island, gazing at stars or whispering strategy to the wind, just smile. You've walked with an emperor, and now you may rest like one.